Hi guys, and I'm the Retro Critic here, and today I'll be reviewing and talking about the Banjo Kazooie Gameboy Advance games. So long before Rareware was bought by Microsoft, and before Rareware even went to the Xbox console, Rareware was still owned by Nintendo, and the Rareware team was still working with Nintendo and making games for them. So before the buyout, this was where at the time Rareware made a few games for the Game Boy Advance, and some of their Game Boy Advance games weren't that bad. So later, Rareware wanted to make some Banjo Kazooie Game Boy Advance games, and later these games had mixed reviews, and some of these games have a cult following with some fans. So these games were received pretty average in sales, and some of these Banjo Kazooie Game Boy Advance games has a nice following with some fans. So guys, let's find out and see for ourselves, and let's go and check out and let's take a look at the Banjo Kazooie Game Boy Advance games. So Rareware did a few games on the Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance. Here on the Game Boy Advance, Rareware did made only two Banjo Kazooie games on its system, and those games were Banjo Pilot and Banjo Kazooie Gruntys Revenge. And so since I'm doing release dates first, I'm going to talk about the release dates first, and that I'm doing it in chronological order in timeline terms, in terms of the timeline. So I'll be talking about Banjo Pilot first, because I feel like it comes chronologically first, and then later in this video, I'll review, and I'll be talking about Banjo Kazooie Gruntys Revenge. Again, I'm just doing chronological order in terms of the timeline. So for now, I will be talking about Banjo Pilot, and so guys, let's now take a look at Banjo Pilot. So Banjo Pilot came out in 2005, and it was a 2D and semi-3D pilot racing game. The game was okay, and it did decently in sales. It did pretty well in the market, to be fair. So Banjo Pilot is a pilot racing game, and it's where you drive airplanes and you're doing races. And it's where you're doing races with airplanes, basically. I mean, there's no story here, and I don't think there's barely any story here at all. And it's just racing with planes, and it's just a pilot racing game here. So also, I do believe that this game takes place before Banjo Kazooie, and why? Well, that's because the characters look different here. For example, Grunty looks different. For example, Grunty looks the same, and Grunty has her green body here. And this game has to take place before Banjo Kazooie, and that's because the characters look like they're their own counterparts from this first game, and they look like they're the ones from the first game. And besides, look at Grunty. Grunty looks the same here in the first game, and that's because she has her green body here, and so this game has to take place before the first game. So this game is more like a spin-off game, and it's where you play all of the Banjo characters, and it's just a flying racing game, and it's just where you're flying and racing, and that's it. And it's where you get to move Banjo characters, but it's not a car racing game, but it's more of a flying racing game. And I wish it was more of a car racing game, but that's besides the point. And I don't know why every Banjo character had a racing game, and I don't know why Banjo never had a racing game. Well, okay, maybe if you count Banjo driving a car and Diddy Kong racing, but still, you get my point. Now, later in those awful Xbox games, but no, I'm not thinking of Banjo having his own racing game, but you get my point. But you know what I mean. And Banjo later went into those awful Xbox games, but still, you know what I mean. And this game is more of a spin-off of the Banjo games, and it's not great, and this Banjo game is boring, and this Banjo game is just okay, and as a Banjo game, it's just fine. So that was Banjo Pilot, and I think Banjo Pilot is just an average game. So guys, I give Banjo Pilot a 4 out of 10. And I think a 4 out of 10 makes the most sense for Banjo Pilot. And I think it kind of deserves that rating. And I just feel like this game is just kind of average, to say the least. So that was Banjo Pilot, and that's all I have to say about Banjo Pilot. So guys, that was what I think about Banjo Pilot, and so those were my thoughts on Banjo Pilot. So now let's get into Banjo Kazooie Gruntys Revenge. So Banjo Kazooie Gruntys Revenge is a game that was on the Game Boy Advance, and it was a adventure platformer game, really. The game came out in 2003, and it was a 2D semi/3D adventure platformer game. The game was a success, and it did well in sales. The game actually did pretty well in the market. This game takes place before Banjo Tooie, and so this game is a prequel and takes place after the ending of the first Banjo Kazooie game, and it's a sequel to the first game. So the story of the game is where some of the rocks fall on Grunty. And it's where Klungo is helping Grunty out of the rocks, and then later Klungo has the idea. And then Klungo uses a spellbook to get the ghost of Grunty out and into a robot. And later, after Klungo uses the spell to get the ghost of Grunty out of the rocks, she has her soul go into this robot, Klungo. And Klungo made this robot by Grunty, by the way. And later, the soul of Grunty goes into the robot, the Mecha Grunty it's called. And later, we now see Robot Grunty, Mecha Grunty it's sometimes called. And so later, Klungo and Robot Grunty wants to have revenge on Banjo and Kazooie. And so later, Klungo and Robot Grunty, Mecha Grunty, kidnaps Kazooie, and Grunty time travels, goes into into the future, and later Grunty has Kazooie held captive, imprisons her, and later Banjo finds Mumbo, and Mumbo helps Banjo, and he sends him into the future, and from there on, Banjo travels through the past and present, and Banjo has to restore and save the past and future, and undo Grunty's doing. And so later, Banjo has to save Kazooie from Grunty, and that was the story of the game. So later in the game, you're in the past, and you stumble upon Bottle's great-grandfather, Bozai. And Bottle's great-grandfather, Bozai, has the most annoying sounds I ever heard of my life. Oh god, make it stop. Please make it stop. But that's not all. There's more. And Bozai does the most annoying sounds I ever heard of my life. And he does the most horrendous noises I ever heard in my life. And he does the most horrendous noises I ever heard in my life. Make it stop. Make it stop! Like, seriously, that hurts my ears. Like, jeez, it's just so painful to hear. Like, it's just so horrendous to hear. Bozai. Like, that has to be the most awful thing to hear I ever heard in my life. I'm serious, guys. Like, seriously, Bozai almost gives me a headache. Like, it's such a pain in the ass to hear. Like, Jesus, I feel so bad to play that game to kind of hear that guy talk. Like, seriously. Like, that has to be just so horrible to, like, witness that firsthand when you play that game. But that aside, okay, I think I said enough about that. I think I ranted on enough about that topic. But now moving on to what Bozai teaches you and what he does in the game. Like, now moving on what Bozai does for you in the game, and I'm going to tell you how he helps you in the game. But that aside, Bozai helps you in the game, and he gives you moves, and he gives you tips and advice on what to do, and he just helps you with your moves. So later in the game, you go back to the past and future, and in the past and future, you go into different worlds and explore different locations and meet different people, and you even help a lot of people in this game, and you collect some honeycombs in the game and some jiggies in the game, and you collect honeycombs in the game here and there once in a while, and you do have to collect most of the jiggies of the game. So now the bosses of the game. And the bosses of the game are just Klungo, and that's it. And that's right, you have to just fight Klungo in this game like 4 times. You have to fight Klungo like 4 times here in this game. And Klungo throws potions at you, and he tries to hit you, and he has a force field, and he shoots magic spells at you. And later, you have to break his force field. Later, you broke his force field, and you destroy his magic spells, and you have to destroy his magic spells, and you try not to get hit by his potions and stop them, and then you have to punch Klungo back, and later Klungo gets defeated and destroyed, and he retreats and he runs away, and those are the bosses of the game, and that was the bosses of the game. Now, I do like Klungo. Klungo is a fun boss battle. I think he's a pretty decent boss battle. As a boss, he is pretty tough sometimes, but he can be easy once in a while. He is a pretty challenging boss, but as you get used to it, he's actually pretty easy. But overall, I do like Klungo as a boss battle, and as a boss, and to be honest, I actually do like Klungo as a boss fight here. Klungo is alright, but overall, I think Klungo is just an average boss battle, and that's kind of my thoughts on the Klungo boss battles. And you sometimes fight Mecha Grunty, and you have to, like, fight Mecha Grunty here once in a while. And you pretty much have to fight her, like, 3 or 4 times in this game. Actually, no, I think you fight her, like, 4 times in this game. And she's just a tough boss overall, Mecha Grunty. And Mecha Grunty is just a really tough boss in this game once in a while. I mean, she's an okay boss. I think she's an interesting boss battle in the game. I kind of like her as a boss battle, and I find her to be a fun boss battle overall, and that's kind of my thoughts on that. And sometimes, and you don't fight her until the final boss, but you also don't fight her until, like, the final boss. So later, Banjo saves Kazooie, and now the buddy duo is back to, and now Banjo and Kazooie are now reunited, and now you can both now play as Banjo and Kazooie, and you actually control both Banjo and Kazooie now as the buddy duo as they are. Later, Banjo can even use Kazooie to shoot at things. And later, Banjo now uses Kazooie to shoot at enemies and bosses at the game. He fights some more of the bosses of the game. So that's kind of nice and fun to know. So later you have to fight the final boss of the game. And the final boss of the game is Robot Grunty, Mecha Grunty. And that was the final boss of the game. And so Robot Grunty, Mecha Grunty, has a force field, and she tries to zap you, and she tries to use her magic spells on you, and she tries to hit you. And later you broke his force field. Later you have to break her force field, and you later destroyed her magic spells, and later you have to destroy her magic spells, and you have to try to not get hit by her zaps and then you stop her, and then you have to punch her back, and then you have to stop her. And then later, Robot Grunty, Mecha Grunty gets defeated and destroyed, and Robot Grunty, Mecha Grunty is no more, and the soul of Grunty escapes, and the soul of Grunty runs away, and the ghost of Grunty goes back into the rock, and the ghost of Grunty goes back inside the rock. And then later, Klungo helping Grunty, and you see Klungo still trying to push the rocks away and trying to get Grunty out of there. And later, Grunty vows her vengeance again. And later, you, Banjo, save Kazooie, and then you have to go back to their own time. And then you go back to the present, and Banjo and Kazooie celebrate, and they have a good time. So that was Banjo Kazooie Grunty's Revenge. And Banjo Kazooie Grunty's Revenge was a decent game looking back on it. And honestly, when I played this game, it's actually pretty average looking back at it when I played it. So guys, I give Banjo Kazooie Grunty's Revenge a 6 out of 10. And I think it deserves a 6 out of 10, and I think that makes the most sense. So that was the Banjo Kazooie Game Boy Advance games, and these games were pretty good. And these games were unique for their time. And I think the Banjo Kazooie Game Boy Advance games were interesting for their time, and I miss those kinds of games. These games were interesting and creative for their time, and it was a different era back then. These games were an end of an era, and I think they were fascinating and fun for their time. And they were great, and these were good games. And these games were so much fun and creative, and they were unique, and they were just really fascinating. So guys, that was the Banjo Kazooie Game Boy Advance games, and that was what I think about them, and those were my thoughts on the Banjo Kazooie Game Boy Advance games. So guys, I'm Retro Critic, and I'm out. And I'll see you guys in the next video time, and I'll see you guys around, and peace out, and bye.